Thank you so much, and thank you very, very much for giving us the opportunity to speak to you today. We were supposed to be standing on the podium with Sarah Jane Bray, who some of you might know. She's a leading light in police wellbeing, works very closely with the retention portfolio lead, who I think now is Martin Brunning, moved from Jason Hogg, and also set up the spin-off, which is the wellbeing group for investigators, given the retention problem with investigating officers at the moment. So Sam and I are both co-chairs, of the academic reference group that provides sort of academic support to the retention portfolio group and also the investigators wellbeing group as well. And I think Sarah Jane wanted us today to talk about some of the work that we've been doing in the academic reference group. And what we've been trying to do is really drive a conversation about wellbeing into a conversation about efficiencies, so that it talks about wellbeing as a business case that really should be prioritised across policing, more so perhaps than it has been in the past. And that's what we're going to do today, talk a little bit about that. So as I was introduced, my name is Emma Williams, and I'm a professor in applied research across uniformed services and also the director of CEEUPS. And I was also the Pillar 4 lead for CEEUPS, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. It was a Home Office funded project exploring the investigation of sexual violence, and Pillar 4 led on the officer wellbeing and learning and development strand of that project. And I think that's probably where I've become interested in wellbeing. I've always been interested in it, but I've certainly learnt an awful lot from that work. And one of the things it really did show us is that there are missed opportunities for preventing the escalation of wellbeing issues. And I think there's a constant focus in policing on initiatives to try and deal with things when it's almost too late. So I think what we want to do today is talk about prevention and focus the conversation in that frame. And I'll let Sam introduce herself.
Morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having us here, and thank you for the wonderful hospitality last night, which Emma and I had to really resist taking too much advantage of, so we were fresh this morning. So yeah, I'm Sam Lundrigan. I'm a professor of public protection and director of IPPPRI, which is the International Policing and Public Protection Research Institute. Also at Anglia Ruskin University, we sort of lead our two institutes hand in hand and work very closely together. At my institute, we work very closely with policing and other sectors to conduct applied research with the aim of supporting the global response to exploitation and abuse in all its forms. And a key focus, like Emma, for us, is on workforce wellbeing and how, as researchers, we can support policing in understanding both the impact on and effective responses to protecting the officers and staff undertaking the critical but difficult work that you do. A particular strand of the wellbeing work that I've been involved in over the last few years is working with officers and staff tasked with responding to child sexual abuse in particular, and understanding the impact of working in these roles on wellbeing and using that evidence to help inform policy and practice around emotional health and safety. And I'll hand back to Emma.
Thanks. Okay. Let's hope I get this right. Okay. So I'm very, very aware that you've had a lot of input over the last few days on wellbeing, so I hope I'm not going to repeat what others have said. I'm sure that there will be some crossovers, but as I've said, we want to very much focus this conversation about wellbeing on impact, and we want to talk about how wellbeing can impact on the delivery of policing and policing as a business and as its in terms of its efficiency. We also want to talk to you a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing with that very much in mind, about making this conversation a more strategic conversation about prevention and about thinking around wellbeing as an efficiency debate. The work that we've done has been completed in collaboration with our police colleagues who work in the groups that I mentioned earlier, and also a number of academics who focus on police wellbeing nationally. So it certainly isn't just work that Sam and I have done, standalone individuals. Long-term sickness issues and the loss of officers early in their careers, particularly after significant money has been spent on their training, their onboarding and their education, is clearly really inefficient. It's wasteful of money, and at a time when we are struggling financially around spending cuts and spending reviews, it's really important that we start to think about that in the context of efficiency. There's a bank of evidence, which I'm sure you've heard about over the last few days, available, that's been created from reviews, from researchers, from the academy and from policing itself, outlining what might be done to prevent well-being issues and subsequent decisions to leave the service. And yet much of the time, from what we gather from talking to the officers that we speak to, is that the offer is given after officers are already struggling. So they're taking time off to cope already, and they're being given tools, if you like, to help them cope with the symptoms they experience as a result of their well-being issues. So essentially what we know is that officers at the moment, many of them are not thriving at work, and this is having significant impacts on both them as individuals, but also on the efficiency of your organisations. One of the biggest issues that came out of the work that we did in CEEUPS was a clear identification of incremental stages of burnout. And if you've got incremental stages of burnout, there are opportunities for those stages to be intervened with and to prevent it going to the point where people are just completely burned out and they're taking time off work. Often the symptoms can present as physical symptoms, which actually places even more stress on the officers themselves as they start to think that there's something physically wrong with them. And then, of course, you've got the efficiency of them accessing the health service and also taking time, making decisions to take time off work. So what we want to do here today is very much focus on prevention and why this is crucial for policing as a business. So I don't need to talk through this area. I'm sure all of you are very aware of why this is important. There are national and local reasons as to why this needs to happen, but prioritising wellbeing should be placed at the centre of all the discussions we have around police reform, local change programmes and force communication strategies. It has got to become a more strategic conversation. The reasons for this are really, really clear. From all of the research that's done on wellbeing, if you look at the link between officers being unwell and the way that they're delivering a service, it is impacting on the service delivered to the public. It's really important in the context of police legitimacy. I think also we know that officers who are not feeling a sense of fairness or a sense of sort of salient offers around their wellbeing are also unlikely to advocate for their organisations outside. And the bigger picture of that is it can impact on people's decisions to join if they're getting negative perceptions from officers who are already serving. And also it clearly links to efficiencies, productivity and performance, which of course we know is really, really important. So I think what we're trying to say here is that there needs to be more investment in people, but at an earlier stage. It's not just about dealing with things when it's too late. You've got to start to think about these things from the very, very start of somebody's career. So the three main challenges at the moment for policing, and we hear about this all the time, are recruitment, retention and wellbeing. And those things are fundamentally linked. So from the research that certainly we've been involved in and many other academics and police people we speak to, the demand that people are dealing with obviously sits at the centre of these issues. And yet, in terms of understanding how we engage with a conversation about demand, there seems to be very little. And I know if Sarah Jane was standing up here today, she would be talking about the need for a strategic review of demand. And I'm not just talking about the amount of demand, because in ways there's not very much we can do about that at the moment, but the pressures that officers are under to deal with it and how equipped they feel to actually deal with some of that well. The demand is complicated, it's complex, and for a young officer joining the service, those things are hard to deal with if they haven't got the right skills and knowledge to enable them to do it. So, I think, really important to mention here that the recent wellbeing survey, which I know you've heard about over the last couple of days, clearly shows that it's the pressure of the demand and its management that is the core issue. It's not necessarily the amount, but it's about the pressure they feel to deal with it and their ability to do so. So these three core strategic problems for policing are really, really interconnected. And there are some real opportunities here by using the evidence that we have. All of this is based on a firm evidence base. is to start to build a strategy for wellbeing that doesn't just develop activities and interventions that are reacting to the problem, but we're building work that starts to address the causes of some of the symptoms that we're seeing, often when it's too late. When officers join policing, they often report very poor onboarding processes. This came out in research, particularly around the Uplift programme. The processes that they go through when they join don't effectively consider, for example, individual diversities, hidden disabilities, and what that might mean for officers in terms of them needing a more flexible approach to their joining process. So what might people need that covers those differences as they join? How do they learn? How might they learn better if we knew the information about those individuals when they joined? In terms of demand, we're constantly hearing from officers that they don't feel prepared enough through their training, particularly in the context of some of the complex demands that they have to deal with. And also we hear a lot about a lack of connection between their classroom learning and the practicalities of police work. There are clear opportunities there for us to start to have those conversations about doing those things better from the very, very point of officers joining the job. As officers progress through their career, they report a lack of recognition and reward, and when they're struggling to deal with the pressure and often putting in discretionary effort to deal with that, that can compound their motivations, their desire to deliver product and be productive, and also their commitment to the service and how they advocate for it. Even small things like not being able to take short breaks, impacts on their perceptions of leadership within the organisation, and that again is really clearly highlighted in the new wellbeing survey. Perhaps most importantly is their perception of not having a voice, not being able to speak up about their experiences of unfairness, about discrimination, and indeed about their the long-term issue. There are big issues, and we heard about this yesterday from the wellbeing panel, the issues around stigma when it comes to opening up about welfare issues. And again, there are some real opportunities here for us to be able to enable those conversations, or at least for the leaders within the organisations to present a more psychologically safe space for those people to speak up. Finally then is the impact this all has on wellbeing itself, which obviously links to the strategic problem of retention. Officers report emotional exhaustion and becoming disassociated with the public, which is a really serious factor to consider and identify when we think about the escalation to burnout. People's home lives become affected, as we know from some of the fantastic work that was commissioned via Oscar Kilo, and officers started to question their own sense of professionalism. So there's so many opportunities here for us to start to do something different. We know all of this. The research has been reporting the same things over many, many years, and yet we still see the same results over and over again in our wellbeing surveys. And there is a clear need for a more strategic and a systems-based approach to preventing the progression to burnout. So, here we go. What I've tried to do here is just to highlight a really small amount of issues. I could have probably talked about this for the whole hour day, but I've just picked out some key points here. Some of the most recent results are from the Wellbeing Survey are on this slide, and I know you will have heard about them already. But what I've tried to do here is highlight how the core areas which we know negatively impact on welfare remain really, really problematic. So some of these findings are particularly concerning and highlight that the evidence we have on organisational factors and stressors remain underused at an operational and a strategic level. We've known this stuff for years, and yet the wellbeing figures are not shifting at all, which means that somewhere the connection between the evidence and the strategic delivery around wellbeing is not connecting. Authentic welfare offers and psychological safety to speak out remains a huge challenge. 16% of respondents in the survey reported experiencing bullying and harassment. That might not sound very much, but it is a very significant number. But 46% of those 16% didn't report it. They didn't report it because they didn't feel anything would be done about it. And that's particularly clear in the constable and sergeant ranks, which is really, really, really bad, because actually they're the people that are leaving. There's a wealth of really useful information in the survey, and I'd really encourage you, when the individual force reports come out, to use that survey strategically. I think it's a really good survey. It's dare I say it, I think it's better than the previous one we had. It gives some real practical detail around what your drivers are of well-being, and it's really focused on organisational justice, and there are some practical takeaways from that survey. The core messages from my reading of that survey is that we've got serious issues with trust in the police from your officers, an ability to speak out, an inability to empower officers with the right skills they need, and also a problem with unvoiced discrimination, which really does impact on how officers decide to stay or not to stay, and also their perceptions of their leadership within that force. So, before I hand over to Sam, I've just got a couple of slides, and it is based on research, but there are some strategic opportunities that are available from the research that really talk to some of these problems around retention, what we can do with new recruits, and how we can deal with well-being better. They are real game changers, and I think it's really important that we start to think about these in the longer term. These issues will move beyond simply throwing interventions out that might work as a reaction to welfare problems, and they start to consider the core causes of the problems. So we're really good, aren't we, at problem solving around crime? Neighbourhood policing's really good at problem solving around crime and antisocial behaviour. What we're not really good at is dealing with the causes of the issues that affect our own people, and that's just got to change. So we need to better understand risk and demand. How can officers be enabled to better deal with the demand they are experiencing? And how can the correct classification of offences and offence risk assist with where those demands sit within different groups of officers? Myself and some colleagues have just done a project with Avon and Somerset called Project Bright Light, which was looking at domestic abuse in that force, and it was really clear that the demand sitting with response officers, very, very young response officers with very little experience in the job, were carrying the most complex demand around coercive controlling behaviour, non-fatal strangulation cases, and they simply did not have the skills to be able to deal with it, but they were holding them because there was nowhere else for those cases to go. And that isn't an efficient way of dealing with things. They were holding cases that they just did not know what to do with. That can be reviewed. So how can those at a national level better think through the onboarding processes? How can we start to consider diversity in our conversations with new recruits, intersectionality, and think about flexibility in conversations with new recruits? There's a great piece of work that's just been done by Portsmouth University around this, and the findings are really practically useful, and it would make a difference to people's experiences of joining the job. I think we need to further support peer support schemes. There isn't an evidence base to suggest that they are really helpful in identifying issues for officers as they start to get worse. So that whole prevention piece to stop that escalation of burnout. And really key, and this again is grounded in loads of evidence, is allowing time needed for continuous professional development and learning. We need to change the narrative to see learning as an investment. It's an investment in your people, but it's also an enabler of better dealing with your demand because people feel capable to do it. It shouldn't be seen as an abstraction. Officers who work in a supportive learning environment repeatedly report feeling more professional and capable to do their jobs well. Finally, how can you enable breaks and chunks of time out for reflection and decompression? We've seen it happen in forces following Soteria, giving their officers just a little bit of time out, and it really does make a difference, particularly for those in high-risk roles who we know are struggling with their well-being, perhaps more seriously than other groups of officers. And one other issue here, I think, and John Harrison mentioned it yesterday, is how can we start to use data better to understand our well-being problems? We're getting really good at conversations about data when it comes to crime and preventing crime, but why aren't we using data better to understand what problems we've got locally? And then we can really think about matching the right interventions onto those problems, because without good problem definition around your well-being problem, interventions simply won't work. So, final slide for me, you'll be pleased to hear. More meaningful local strategies are required to address wellbeing, which measure progress and allow officers to speak up. So often we hear officers say that there are offers in their forces around wellbeing support, but actually for them, they didn't feel that they were salient. They weren't measured, they weren't evaluated, they were simply there, which is great that they're there, but we need to be really effective at evaluating them and making sure that they're actually focused on the right problems. Supervision is absolutely essential, and again, one-to-one conversations, pausing, having a conversation about how people really are can really help with that escalation and really identify perhaps some of the support that individual officers need. So for the sake of everybody, including the public and the individual officers and the health of all of your organisations, we do need to start to focus more on prevention. And there is enough evidence to suggest that strategically we can start to do that. It needs to happen alongside a review of wider challenges, and I totally accept that. It's not just a local issue. It should be a national priority, and it should feature, as I said, at the centre of the reform agenda. And I know Louisa Rolfe is very keen that that happens. The causes are evidenced, and on that note, I'm going to hand over to Sam, who will talk through some of the practical things that we've been doing as an academic reference group with our policing colleagues to try and land this. So I would really appreciate your thoughts afterwards.
Thank you. Thanks, Emma. You couldn't get me
glass of water. Yeah.
So from the place of opportunity that Emma has just presented there, what I'd like to do is describe a piece of work that we've been leading in our capacity as co-chairs of the Wellbeing Academic Reference Group. What I'm going to present is by no means a polished, definitive product. In fact, this is the first public area it's had since we did this work. And we're really excited by it, and we're really keen to get your feedback, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We can, that will help us improve and refine what we're trying to do. And it really, what it does is it represents the start of a commitment from a group of vested researchers and police practitioners to see what we could do together. So earlier this year, we came together, a group of academics, as Emma said, who have an interest and expertise in wellbeing work, and police wellbeing leads. We came together with the aim of using the collective expertise in the room to begin to develop a strategic theory of change for wellbeing in policing with a clear focus on prevention that hopefully would build on existing national level guidance such as the wellbeing strategy, the wellbeing framework and so on, and hopefully in time be helpful to police leaders such as yourselves locally to operationalise, embed and apply wellbeing strategy to meet the needs of your local issues. Oh, thank you. You're ahead of me. So what we did is we began the process of the day, and we had this wonderful facilitator who live scribed very skillfully the discussions in the room and produced these, what we think are really great infographics to sort of summarise what was quite complex discussions. So we began the process by looking at where are we now. So together we mapped out the key features of the wellbeing landscape in policing as we see it today. And what you're seeing here is that visual representation of that discussion, which I'll just take a moment to unpack. A lot of it Emma's already covered and mirrors what has been found in the wellbeing survey, for example. But to the left of the signpost are the positives in the landscape, those factors that represent a really solid foundation from which to build. And on the right are the not so positives, or negatives, I guess, potential areas for development. And there may be factors on both sides that you recognise in your own forces. So starting with the positives, there was a real recognition in the room that meaningful conversations are taking place, not only nationally within forces, but also in the wider community. And this really is starting to mobilise change. There are also many examples of really good practice across the country and increasingly strategies that are based on solid research, and the evidence base to inform practice is growing. I mean, I know as researchers, we have seen a plethora of really good, high-quality research coming out in recent years, and that can be actually quite difficult to galvanise, actually, and work through. But that's, one of the jobs that we can do is try and work through that. There are also Attitudes towards well-being are also changing on the ground, and there's no doubt that the police service is made up of committed individuals with a desire to change. To the right of the signpost are the more challenging factors that can get in the way of effective and sustainable transformation, and as I say, they mirror very much what Emma was talking about earlier. There was a perception that sometimes while there is a willingness to change at the policy level, this doesn't always translate to deep cultural transformation in day-to-day operations. There can be a duplication of effort, which against a backdrop of tight budgets and stretched resources is just not business efficient. There's inconsistency in approaches to well-being, that's recognised, and the capturing of promising practice and evaluation is rather limited. Data collection was perceived as poor, so therefore making it hard to track and measure what works, where, and for whom. And it was also strongly felt, again mirroring what Emma said, that there can be too much focus on reacting to well-being issues after the harm has occurred, rather than that more preventative approach that we would all want to see. And finally, there was also shared experience that stigma and silencing around mental health and well-being persists, and that sometimes punitive and risk-averse responses can affect performance. And that has come through really clearly in the work I've done nationally with investigators of child sexual abuse. That's come through really, really clearly. Those sort of barriers to accessing support come up time and time again in conversations with officers. And lastly, that there persists an inequity between physical and emotional health and safety, and that balance, of course, urgently needs to be addressed. So the flip side of these negatives, though, is that discussing and acknowledging them brings some of the causes of poor welfare to the forefront and positions them as priorities to address. Thanks, Emma. So from this point, we asked the question, what would a strategic theory of change look like if we were to include the necessary components to move from the current position to one that firmly positions policing in England and Wales at the forefront of impact and innovation in relation to workforce well-being? This is a result of our collective thinking. As you can see, we used a tree as a metaphor for our planting future possibilities theory of change. So the canopy represents the ultimate goal, a thriving and healthy police force who serves the public well. Where there is good organisational health and productivity, we can expect healthy officers and good community relationships. Some of the vital components that were agreed necessary to move towards this goal are sort of listed in the trees, in the leaves there. Resource, time and support for well-being, of course, evidence-based interventions, good quality data, a national strategic approach with embedded well-being systems, and a workforce empowered to speak up, and a public who understands the challenges faced by policing. At the bottom are the roots that represent the values and behaviours, recognised as being critical to attaining a thriving and healthy workforce. The values such as authenticity, empathy, respect, emotional intelligence, and so on, and the behaviours, listening, vulnerability, transparency, collaboration, trauma-informed, and openness. These are the characteristics that can help promote growth and health throughout the organisation. And then the trunk represents the system drivers, leadership, data, access awareness and supervision. And the system needs to be strong enough to support growth, but also flexible enough to bend with changing conditions. And then, of course, are the people, the change makers, the force leaders, the regulators, the officers, third sector organisations, and the wider public as well. And then lastly, over to the right, I'm pointing as if I think over to the right, any theory of change needs to be measurable. We need to be able to track progress and measure organisational health. And it comes back to good data. There is, as Emma said, the National Wellbeing Survey that can be used both nationally and locally to consider progress. And there are, of course, other measures such as retention rates, culture surveys, sickness rates, recruitment profiles, and so on. There are all ways to explore organisational health. And establishing effective measures also gives credibility to any work, as it shows officers that you are genuine and driven to make real change. So for police leadership, there are some important roles to play here. Of course, the values need to be modelled from the top through behaviour, empowering others in the organisation to normalise mental health and well-being into day-to-day policing, to improve systems and to develop people. Of course, the effort also needs sustaining. We know that what we're facing here is long-term culture change, not a quick fix. And we need to move away from, what Emma calls continuous I can't say it.
Interventionitis.
There we go, she can. That can really deflect from the real issues. And then connecting the dots, helping others see how a healthy tree directly improves public service. So it's not just about obviously making people feel better, it's about creating a strategic framework that demonstrates how investing in people creates better outcomes for the communities they serve. So the last slide that I want to share is the last part of the work that we thought about was think about how a theory of change might be operationalised, implemented in practice in individual forces. So we designed this roadmap for the reference group to start thinking about how we move our conversations on with national police partners. And this visual here starts to map out how the theory of change might be implemented, whilst acknowledging the very real barriers that need to be recognised and overcome with a longer-term change programme. We would ask you to think about how you might use this method to consider your longer-term plans for well-being at a local level. There is no doubt that some of this work needs to be mirrored nationally, especially in terms of effective measurement and tracking of well-being data, raising the profile of police well-being in reform agendas and acknowledging the role of leadership in this space. So we've devised this roadmap with three stages: short term, around 12 months, medium, 3 years, and longer term, 5-year phases. So in the short term, first of all, absolutely key is to get buy-in from leadership, chiefs, senior policing colleagues, and the support of PCCs. We believe that understanding the link between health and productivity and efficiency is really vital to gaining this buy-in. And then how then can you map what is currently available locally, and does that meet the profile of your local problems or issues? And this requires proper baseline measurement and maybe gap analysis to understand what the problems are, what is working and what isn't working. The Wellbeing Survey does that, as Emma said, offers local information about core drivers of well-being and levels of psychological safety and so on, and can give some useful ground or good ground to start planning actions around change. In the medium term, this is about moving from planning to action. By year 3, we're envisaging that there will be interventions in place, hopefully with evaluations attached to ensure they're effective and working towards your desired outcomes. Essentially, there needs to be much better method to collect promising good practice from across all forces and share it accordingly. There's been a lot of talk about the difficulty of scaling up effective initiatives that work in one place, and this support needs to be in place from the centre. We know data is an issue when it comes to well-being, and this makes it difficult to really understand the problems you face, especially in terms of things like demographics and diversity and who might be experiencing things differently. So data improvements is something that needs to be considered and help the centre understand the problems better in terms of policy at a national level. We also would argue that local work needs to be underpinned by central commitments to well-being, for example, as Emma said, the undertaking of a demand review and raising that public awareness about police welfare and placing the health of the workforce at the heart of the reform agenda. And then phase 3, by year 5, we would hope to see some national learning and standardisation where proven approaches could be rolled out and standardised nationally with appropriate consideration about the adaptation to local contexts and problems. We are also arguing for a national centre of wellbeing excellence to provide ongoing implementation support, evaluation and expertise. And the end goal would be a prevention and workforce focus where supporting officer wellbeing and community relationships becomes business as usual, not a specific quick fix initiative. And this change, of course, needs to be long-term, it needs to be effectively measured, and most importantly, be meaningful for those that need it. Reducing the stigma currently about being open about welfare and showing officers that their welfare is taken seriously. So where are we going from here? As I say, this is very much a living document, and we are working closely with the MPCC Wellbeing Group to develop our thinking together with our policing colleagues, alongside the continued focus from the academic reference group and drive to work with forces, both nationally and locally, to help where we can. I'm sure that every superintendent in this room has seen good initiatives fail and bad outcomes emerge from good intentions. As police leaders, you're the bridge between strategic vision and operational reality, and we hope that some of what we've said has resonated and that there is potential value in the approach that we have mapped out. We'd like to leave you with 2 questions, if you may. Thank you. Thank you for
3,
that.
actually.
Oh, it's 3 questions. 3 questions to consider. I've only got 2 on my, so I'm going to have to turn around and look. And we'd be really keen to your reflections on these and on the work that we are doing and how the reference group can be of assistance in helping you to develop your wellbeing strategy in force. And I'm just going to leave those up there. So thank you for listening to our presentation, and we'd welcome any feedback or questions. Thank you.